Thanks, Akansha, for joining us with all of those details. The Finance Minister, they're very, very clear that MAT, as far as MAT goes, there's going to be absolutely no change there. Some of the key takeaways with the meeting with industry leaders. There we actually saw Corporate India praising the Finance Minister for putting out what they described as a constructive budget. They also laid out some suggestions to the Finance Minister on getting India back on the path of high growth.
We would like you to consider offering the investment allowance at 15% for all projects that involve investment in plant and machinery.
Well, that's India Inc. Speaking with the Finance Minister, but as I pointed out, it's the first ever Google Hangout. Our very own Senthil Chengalvarayan in conversation with the Finance Minister and a whole host of other participants. Let's listen
in North Block, New Delhi. Mr. Chidambaram, pleasure to be with you on this historic Hangout, sir.
Thank you.
Well, we aren't alone, Mr. Chidambaram. We've got 6 other Indians waiting to put you, if I may say, on the hot seat. And there'll be others sending in their questions by messages and video through the next hour. First, we've got a student from Bangalore, IIM Bangalore, Rachel Vardhan. Rachel, thank you for joining us.
A very good evening to Mr. Chidambaram and the other esteemed guests present. I'd like to thank the Finance Minister for providing me with this opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Anand Mahindra, Chairman and Managing Director of Mahindra & Mahindra, joining us from his offices in Mumbai. Anand, thank you.
Good evening, Senthil. Good evening, Finance Minister, and a big hello to everyone.
Mr. Manish Chukani, MD and CEO of Axis Capital, joining us also from Mumbai. Manish, thank you.
Well, a very good evening to the Finance Minister. I don't envy his job, answering questions for the last 3 days. And a big hello to all my fellow participants.
We've got Mr. Jahangir Aziz, Senior Asia Economist and India Chief Economist, JP Morgan. Jahangir, thank you for joining us.
Good evening, FM, and thank you for the invitation.
We've got Ms. Kala Kudva, she's a homemaker from Bengaluru. Kala, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Finance Minister, and thank you for coming to this hangout, and a big thank you to the Google team for inviting me for this great opportunity.
Well, it is indeed a lovely opportunity for all of us. And finally joining us is Mr. Amit Singhal, Senior Vice President of Google Inc. He joins us from the Google headquarters in Mountain View, California.
Hello, Senthil. Hello, Mr. Finance Minister. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to a Google Hangout.
It's a first for most of us, Amit. I think you're the only veteran out here. And thank you all of us for joining us here. We're talking to Mr. Chidambaram in the backdrop of the budget that he presented in Parliament 4 days ago. Frankly, it's been years since I looked forward to a budget with as much anticipation as I did for this one. We were really clinging to our investment grade rating, and the slightest misstep from the Finance Minister on the fiscal deficit would have seen a downgrade of the country to junk status. What would that meant for ordinary Indians? Interest rates would have gone up, jobs would have become scarce, the rupee would have fallen. In short, we would have been in a downward spiral from there on. The budgets averted that. It laid down a roadmap to putting the country's accounts in order. It made some assumptions on growth that may be optimistic but not entirely unrealistic, and for that I rated the budget good when I was asked to in the CNN-IBN studio that evening. Am I completely happy? Well, not really, because while the budget was good in the circumstances, somewhere in the back of my mind I was hoping for the shades of the dream budget that Mr. Chidambaram presented in 1997, a budget that would have immediately reignited the animal spirits of the economy and got India back in investment and job creation mode. Sir, that unfortunately is the weight of expectations that you have to bear. You're like Dhoni going out to bat, and every time people expecting you not just to salvage a draw for us, but to put us onto a winning track. I'd like to ask you now, sir, for your opening remarks.
Well, you have to look at what was done in the light of the objectives that we set for ourselves. Done in the light of the objectives that we set for ourselves. You play according to the pitch. You play according to the weather. The world economy is constrained. India's economy is also constrained. Therefore, there's only so much economic space. Given the restricted economic space, I had set for myself 3 objectives. The first one was, apart from some smaller objectives, the first one was that we must be on the fiscal consolidation path. The second one was, we must attract investment. That's the only way to deal with the current account deficit. And thirdly, we must restart the growth engine, especially in manufacturing. Now, one would have liked to do many more things, but there's no space for that. And there are other objectives, not purely economic objectives, but socio-economic objectives, social objectives. We have to look after the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the minorities, youth, the other backward classes. Therefore, given the restricted economic space, I think we have done what could be done. If we get more space, say after the first or second quarters of 2013-14, certainly we can do more. But that's for the future. For the time being, I think we have done all that could be done given the space that was available to us.
Youth of India looking for from the Finance Minister. Has this budget met?
No, we cannot hear you.
I'm sorry, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Finance Minister, for that. Let me get to Rachel Varadhan. Rachel joins us from Bangalore. She's a student at IIM Bangalore. Rachel, what has the budget meant for you? What has it meant for the youth of this country? Has it met your aspirations? What would you like to ask the Finance Minister? Youth of this country, has it met your aspirations? What would you like to ask the Finance Minister?
Good evening once again, sir. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate the concerns that were shown towards the women's safety and empowerment that were highlighted in the union budget. I personally feel that the 1,000 crore Nirbhaya Fund and the All Women's Bank have a potential to be game-changing initiatives in the next few years. However, while I was going through your budget speech, I could not come across any specific implementable measures which would help address these concerns. So could you please tell us a bit more about the specific programs that these funds will cater to regarding the women's safety and empowerment? Thank you.
See, these are ideas which have to be fleshed out. These are ideas that emerge in discussions with the Prime Minister and a close circle of advisors. This is not shared with too many people before it's announced. We have put away 1,000 crore rupees. And we will now work with other ministries and departments of government which are concerned about women and women's welfare. We will work with NGOs, and then we'll try to find how this money can be used in order to enhance the security for women and the empowerment of women who enter public places, public spaces. I think that's important. That's the purpose of this fund. On the Women's Bank, I've done a lot of homework on that. We are going to start with a headquarters and at least 6 branches in the 6 regions of India. We should be able to do all the preparatory work by October, and we should be able to inaugurate the bank in November. But that's entirely within the Ministry of Finance. It's between the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India. So I think things are under my control there, and we should get the bank going in November. But many of the other ideas too are ideas which are announced in the budget which have to be fleshed out. In fact, I've already sent a note to the Prime Minister requesting him to begin to take crucial interministerial meetings in some areas. In some other areas, the Cabinet Secretary will take a meeting of the secretaries, and in other areas which fall within the Ministry of Finance, I will begin to take meetings. So we want to do all the preparatory work in March and say early April, so that implementation will begin in right earnest by April.
Rachel, an answer. Do you want to follow up with anything there?
No, I think that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anand, if I can come to you, a little while ago when I was listening to the Finance Minister talking to industrialists, the question that he asked was, he wanted to know why industry is still shy of investing. So maybe you could tell us why industry is still shy of investing, but that's an answer he'd like to have, and then go ahead and ask your question.
If I could take the liberty of flipping the order, I'd like to start with the question first, Senthil, because it's a big picture question and related to something you said earlier. Mr. Chidambaram, an important priority for this budget was to show that there was a competent and firm hand in charge of the finances of the country. And frankly, from that point of view, I think you succeeded in this budget beyond any doubt. You certainly demonstrated that. But however, post the budget, there was a refrain that more was needed. I recall at Davos, a mutual friend, Lionel Barber of the Financial Times, mentioned to me that what was needed to be done by businessmen and the government was to put India back on the global agenda. We were simply not part of the conversation. And arguably the budget is such an opportunity to send these signals. But the critics have said that this was a non-event. Now you could answer that in two ways and say that, well, a non-event, no-nonsense budget was exactly what was required and has a longer-term effect. Or you could say there was in fact a big bang concealed inside your budget, we just weren't reading the signals correctly. Which answer would you give, or is there a third answer altogether?
No country in the world that I know is talking about a big bang. Is there a big bang coming out of the US? Is there a big bang coming out of Europe? Please remember the Eurozone is in recession. Germany has contracted in the last quarter. The UK has contracted in the last quarter. Italy is in a tailspin. Japan is stagnating. From the US you get good news one week and bad news another week. There's no big bang anywhere in the world. We can't invent a big bang. What we're trying to do is stabilize our economy, like many other countries are stabilizing their economies, and get the growth engine started. And as I said in the budget speech, if we grow at 6% and above next year, 2013-14, we'll be the second fastest growing economy in the world. So I think these big bangs may make for good media, good theater, but there's really no big bang anywhere in the world in 2013.
If I may come back on the question Senthil asked me about investment. All of us businessmen want to invest. That's how you make money. That's how you earn a living. We want to believe. And we're in this classical situation of waiting for some kind of trigger to believe again. There is a very strong body of opinion that believes that if the RBI follows up on this budget by lowering interest rates, it will be that signal. But Mr. Finance Minister, you will recall at the pre-budget meeting I talked also about process versus content. Or you could say a little element of theatricality, to use your phrase about theatre. Perhaps I could ask that even when you talk, for example, about disinvestment, it was mentioned in pure math terms about what your target was, about 40,000 crores. But maybe could there have been more theatre about how you would go about doing it? Could there have been little more articulation about going out and perhaps evangelizing retail investors who would, and restarting, for example, an equity cult again? A little more about that process might have helped, but you restrained yourself. And in all areas you gave targets, but moved back from that element of theatre that might have created that trigger for us.
You see, in 2012-13, after I took over, every single disinvestment has been a success. Every single one. I started with about 2,000 or 3,000 crore, and we'll end the year with 24,000 crore. For the next year, I have lined up the list of companies which will be disinvested in. I know exactly which company, what amount. We have even a sequence laid out. So we will raise 40,000 crore. It's work in progress. It's a workman-like division of the Ministry of Finance. There is no occasion to make a theatre out of that, because this is simply disinvesting one after another. The first disinvestments will start in April. In fact, we have 3 coming up in March for this year, and the first disinvestments will start in April. So I hope to collect my 40,000 crore. I didn't think that merited theatre in the budget speech. But if you want to know, or we can always find another occasion